Tuesday, July 16th, 2024. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearing. There are 6 cases on the agenda and 7 members present for a quorum. The first case is RPC 3800502G at 2901 South Glebe Road. Mr. Price is asked to withdraw the case. Is there any objection from the county?
There's no objection.
Okay, having said that, then I'll move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Okay, Mr. Matskin, all in favor of the withdrawal? Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. That case is withdrawn. Okay, I see Mr. Peralta, and then do we have Mr. Warren?
Yeah. I don't know if you guys can. Oh. Is that working now?
Oh, there, I see you. I saw a box, but I didn't see it for a minute. Okay, all right, the next case on the agenda is the second. So it is RPC 3402023 at 2011 Crystal Drive. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Okay, yes, and before I start, as we reviewed these last week, the memo responses, we did notice what appeared to be an error in the county's office I&E summary that's found on page 5 for column E, which was for the operating year 2023. It looked like a duplicate of year in 2022 and not the actuals that were reported in the certified I&E survey that was included in our package. We did notify the county of that. Rob had sent me, I think yesterday at around 4:30, a revised office I&E survey. So I'm not sure if you guys are looking at that or the original one to base this off of. But I'll first draw everyone's attention to our page 78 of 197, just our summary of facts for this location.
I'm going to interrupt you 1 second, Mr. Warren. You can stop the clock.
Yep.
Rosa, does everybody have the updated one? I do not.
Okay, and what I would say is like.
Okay, well, wait, Rob, did you send it out to the board?
No, what I sent him was what I saw in the BOE packet as is, and it seemed to be in line with what he was stating as far as the NOI is concerned.
Okay, so just to clarify, without the clock running, so what we have on page 5, is that the correct one, Mr. Warren?
So if you're looking at, it looks like if you look at column C and column E, column C is year in 2022. It lists an NOI of 8,467,845. My column E also shows 8,467,845.
Yeah, mine does not.
Oh, it does not. Does it show? It shows the 8,306,796. Yes. Okay, so that's the correct one.
Okay, good.
I must have gotten a. So I do have the one that Rob sent out, so I can kind of refer to that. But initially, when we were reviewing this, it looked like it was duplicate. So okay.
Okay. All right. So Rosa, go ahead and get the clock rolling again.
So again, I'm going to start on page 78 of 197. This is Crystal Park 1. It's located at 2011 Crystal Drive. It's consistent of 2 tax parcel IDs. The current assessment is $116,429,400, and what we're asking for from the board today is a value of $104,987,900. The property is a 12-story office building originally built in 1985 and is consistent of 445,102 square feet of rentable office space in close proximity to the Crystal City Transit Station or Metro Station. I'll refer again to now page 5 of the county's office I&E summary. The gross potential income or rental rates that the county is applying is $44 a square foot for the occupied space, and 3675 square feet for their estimate of the 180,912 vacant square feet. The petitioner is using the same 3675 square feet for the vacant office space, but per the rent roll, which can be found on page 130 of 197, the actual vacancy was 187,559 square feet. Our rental rate that's being applied to the occupied office space is $42.54, which is a net effective rent and takes into consideration the considerable rent concessions that has gone into this property. And that's going to be one of the main differences between what you'll see in the county's analysis and ours is they are not taking any consideration for rental concessions in their gross potential income. Many of these leases have been, there's been renewals or new leases, and given the state of the market, there's been significant rental concession packages in them. And you can see that in year-end 2022, there was a total of $636,000 in total rental concessions. And to follow that up, this most recent year, there was $1.5 million in total rental concessions. So that's going to make up a pretty significant difference when you look at the total effective gross income that was reported in 2023 of $11,881,337. It's in pretty stark contrast to the county's column F, the test column, which again does not factor in any sort of rental concessions or the actual net effective rent that the tenants are paying here of $14 million. So again, a significant difference between the effective gross income that's been reported here in each of the last 2 years. It was $11,888,000 in 2022, $11,881,000 most recently reported. The county's initial EGI was $13.7 million. They got our most recent INE that is reporting lower NOI overall total revenue than what was reported last year, and they actually increased their EGI from 13.7 to 14 million. The county's expenses, initially they were using a $8 in square foot operating expenses, 3.5 million. This property reported $3.4 million in total expenses, or 28.7% of total revenue in 2022, and 30% or $3.4 million, or excuse me, $3,574,000 in total operating expenses most recently in 2023. We've carried that over into our analysis in terms of the rate per EGI on a percent basis and not the dollar per square foot. So again, that's where you're seeing the difference in the county's test column. They're grossing up the income and not taking into consideration any of the net rental concessions that this property has had to offer to maintain its current occupancy, and is using the actual operating expenses and not assuming that those expenses will go up once occupancy goes up. And this property has been above 40% vacancy for the last several years. Again, this property is 42% vacant, and per the county's guidelines, we're using a 28% stabilized vacancy rate, and then taking a below-the-line deduction for the additional vacancy that is not being captured in the county's assessment. The net operating income, if you just look at the history of this, it's been on a downward trend dating back to 2020, $11.2 million in 2020, $10.3 million in 2021, $8,467,000 in 2022, and then most recently $8,306,800 in 2023. The county's test column of $10 million, say $10.5 million, is significantly higher, $2.2 million higher than this property has been able to generate in any of the two consecutive prior years. So again, when you look at the actual operations of this property, I think it's worth noting again that the difference here is that the county's grossing up the income but not taking into consideration to the actual net effective rent that's taking place at this property, and we're hopeful that the board will consider this in their deliberations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes. Good morning. For this property, we'd like to note that the history of the property is a little misleading. When you look at the NOIs in the previous years, you'll see that I reported that the vacant square footage income was not reported. So when you compare that to our projected NOI, that DREA reconstruction, when we do that for the most recent 2023 INE, you'll see that projection figure NOI is different from what they actually reported. We do ask that the INEs be turned in with that projected income for the vacant square footage. For whatever reason, they don't report it in the previous years nor the most recent 2023 INE. Going into the actual case, we can see that we overestimated the vacant square footage by 7,024 square feet, about a 1.6% difference from what we saw in the most recent 2023 INE rent roll. We underestimated the gross potential income by 1,445,524 after considering the actual income that was reported, and then we projected for the income for the vacant square footage. The resulting NOI is about 1,031,633 difference when comparing the DREA projected NOI in column E1 versus the original assessment, column D. 785,520 difference when comparing the projected NOI, column E1, to DREA's test column, column F. Excess vacancy deductions, we did in the test actually test higher than we should have. The original vacant square footage per square foot rate should have been $36.75 versus what you see $37.25. So it's a difference of 50 cents. Total difference should have been $250,000 less than what you see there for the excess vacancy deduction. But even so, even with that correction, as is at $37.25, 50 cents more, it's a confirmation of the original assessment. Overall, the major change from last year to this year as a result of our changes and what we saw in the 2022 INE when valuing this property for 2024, we had an overall change in the improvement of 20.74%. And overall 16.19% reduction from last year's assessment when you include the land. The land didn't change for this year. With that, we ask that the board confirm this case. We're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
I have a question for the department. A primary element in the appellant's case is that you are not accounting for the substantial concessions that the landlord's making, property owner's making, in order to maintain and attract tenants. I see, of course, it's easy to see that you're suggesting not suggesting, you've written in the INE that it's $44 a square foot for occupied space on page 5. On page 4, you say number 2 under your, the DREA comments that the leased office space, the occupied space, is much higher than that, $48.68. Is that how you're accommodating concessions, the difference between what you see and what you wrote down?
When you look at the average for the spaces leased on the property per the 2023 rent roll, it averages about $48.68. We're using $44, and the $44 is mainly when you look at what we originally had versus what they reported in 2023. There's obviously a delta there that we need to, when we test, we get more accurate information in 2023 versus what we had in 2022. So if you compare 2022 to 2023 columns C and E, you see the increase there in the reported rent, and that's the rent that was only attributable to the leases in place. So in other words, yes.
That's how you account. That's how you answer in a roundabout way the apparent lack of attention to concessions. You really are paying attention.
Correct.
Thanks.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, this is also for Rob. What is the purpose of the income and expense information you gather?
What is the purpose?
Yeah. What do you use it
It,
for?
it gives us a snapshot of I guess, the income and expenses that are reported from each owner. And we derive our guidelines primarily from that information. And with the lack of, I guess, projected NOI, projected income for the vacant square footage, we're left to our other resources to figure out what is the market rent at this particular time. But primarily,
guess-
that's
What good does asking a property owner to guess what they could rent vacant space for? What good is that? I mean, it's supposed to be an accurate an accurate snapshot of the income produced by this property. And I understand that when you create the assessed value, you look at that, but why would you ask a property owner to guess what they could rent vacant space for? I don't see how it adds any information that's helpful. In fact, I think it actually makes it more confusing.
well, I mean, if I were to put this in terms of how I would understand, the county's asking the information, it's like if I owned a property and I would expect a minimum rent that I wouldn't, I would want for my property, that would give me the expectation that I will not accept any rent lower than X. And that's because, given what I pay for the property, what my mortgage is, what my expenses are, there's a certain line that I wouldn't accept as far as, the rent per square foot.
Well, why
But
couldn't that be?
we're doing that today. The appellant is projecting an income, and that's primarily what we're doing is projecting income. So
I know, but not in the income and expense information. That's supposed to be providing me with accurate information so that I can make a judgment. And then, you argue that they could rent the vacant space for more. He argues we could rent it for less because we have concessions. But I don't know why it's in the income and expense information. I mean, maybe I'm wrong and maybe I don't understand what's going on the last 5 years, but I'd always understood that to be an accurate snapshot of what was actually yielded the past year. But we can move on. That's just, my opinion.
well, to be fair, we're using the agent's projected income for that vacant space in our column E1 in our reconstruction.
Okay, I don't see the purpose of that, but we'll move on.
Okay, I have a question for both parties. Mr. Warren, you have in your final column the deduction for RPC ending the vacant land 262, and the county doesn't. So your argument to support removing that from it, and then I want to hear from the county why they didn't deduct it from the final value.
We're including that RPC in there. I wasn't aware that we deducted the value, to be honest. But we included it because we're assuming it's part of one economic unit. Essentially, we're recommending no change on that specific land parcel, but we include it, assuming it's part of the economic whole of the office building, which is the main
so
parcel.
you're keeping them separate. Okay.
Yes, correct.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see it being added in there. It goes from 14.6 to, or excuse me, like 104,685 to 104,987, getting added on to it.
Okay. Okay. All right. Any other questions? No? All right, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Thank you. Again, overall, when we're looking at this property, you'll see that the resulting NOIs with the department's original assessment versus what DREA reconstructed of the 2023 I&E, you'll see that the major difference is there. NOI of about 782,520 when you compare columns E1 to column F. which is our test with the most recent information. So we do ask that the board confirm this case at 116,127,000. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, again, if you just look at this income and expense summary and the trend over the last 4 years, the income has been dropping, and it's very reflective of this market. And most recently, EGI of 11.9 million each of the last 2 years. The county is $3 million above that, essentially. And again, that is reflective of they are not taking, they're just taking a gross rent, whatever's on the rent roll, and applying that to their total GPI estimate, and not assuming any net effective rent or the impact of rental concessions to keep the current occupancy, the current tenants in place, and trying to attract more tenants, because again, this is a property that's struggled with vacancy significantly over the last couple of years, over 40%. And then the county will also make adjustments and gross up the income, but won't make any adjustments to the operating expenses. Some of the operating expenses are directly tied to how proportionately high the income is. They kept the actual income expenses, and like, I mean, example of that is with the management fee. The management fee at 3% of EGI is significantly higher at $14 million than it is at 11.88 million, which is what actually was reported most recently in 2023. So again, you just look at the actuals of this property and the trend of it. The county is assuming this property should be capped at a $2 million higher NOI than it's reported in any of the last 2 prior years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board members. Where is everybody? Mr. Hoffman.
Kind of to Barnes's point earlier, I actually like the way that the appellant fills out the I&E. They cross out the thing that says projected, and then they just write actuals in there. So it's like, I don't think, especially with these REITs, they report an actual number. It's an actual number, right? It's like they're not going in and doing separate accounting. So I take those numbers, and realistically, if something's gone 3 years straight and NOI is around, 8.5 million, that seems to be what the NOI is. I don't know. It seems like a lot of mental gymnastics to try to come up with a $10 million theoretical NOI if some theoretical tenants that don't exist jumped into the market and all of a sudden came into the building. So, I just try to keep it simple. I took last 3 years and averaged them out, and then used the county's cap rate and came up with a number that's a little bit higher than the appellant and a little bit lower than the department. And that was 108, 391, 200.
108, I'm sorry.
391, 200.
Okay. Mr. Metzgen?
I don't, maybe I'm missing something, so that's why we're talking now. The prior NOIs in the 8 million plus range didn't include potential rent coming in from vacant office space consistently. And when the department plugged in that number, it was far less, forgetting about the 50 cents one way or the other per square foot, it was far less than the actual rents coming in from occupied space. So I don't think it's an artificially high number. I also looked a long time at the original assessment column D and saw some figures, given that it was based, on 2-year-old information and why we do tests and why and so forth, that some of the numbers were too high, some were too low. It all kind of averaged out, canceled out is a better word, based on what the appellant had submitted after the original analysis in column D was constructed. So for those 2 reasons, it seems just fine with me, the bottom line on column D or F. I mean, they're very, very close. And finally, the operating expenses, I'm not a big proponent that there's a hand in glove relationship between income and operating expenses. It's reflective, but it's not a 1-for-1 or a 1.5-for-1. If you double the rent, you double the operating expenses, to make a gross example. So I thought in both columns, D and F, the operating expenses were really fit in with the actual experience of the landlord over the last several years.
Okay, Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, what I did, because I looked at the NOI, and so when the county reconstructed the actual, they ended up at 11 million, which is, way higher than the actual, and also the actual for last year. But I looked at the column G, which the applicant submitted, and I thought that NOI showed a achievable increase in NOI. And so I took that and then applied the county's cap rate. And I did not adjust all the bottom of the line figures, because that would have taken me about an hour, I think. What I did is I ended up at 109,913,100. So I think I agree with Greg. I think the county has presented an artificially erroneous, optimistic picture of what this property can do.
Yeah, Mr. Penaranda?
I mean, I don't have any problem with the assessment the way it is right now. We look at normally all the numbers, the gross potential income, the EGI, the NOI. The only difference that I see here is the expenses that the appellant is using, which is much higher. And even if we do an average, like we sometimes do, like, Mr. Hoffman is trying to do just do an average for the past 3 years. Even if we average those three numbers for the expenses, they don't even come up to what the appellant has. So I think all the numbers are in line. I don't really see where we should make any further adjustments. I'm okay with the current assessment.
Yeah, I guess I would have to say I agree with Greg and Barnes. I mean, if you look at the NOI, you get 10,384,83. And I get that it was originally assessed without having the 2023 information, but then to test it out even higher, I just think it's too high. I think it's to a level that the building's not achieving. And we do have a downward trend, and we've seen in other properties when there's a downward trend, we reduce. Mr. Mendez.
I agree with Mr. Matzkin and Mr. Penaranda. Just comparing columns D and G, even with the appellant's adjustments, the county came out with a lower EGI, and the expenses, they're higher than the previous 3 years at $8 a foot, and I think they're fine as well. So I would confirm the assessment. Plus, we're down 16.2% from last year, so I think that's in the right direction.
Well, it's probably because it was over-assessed last year, would be my thought, but go ahead, Mr. Matzkin.
Yeah, just quickly, maybe I missed something, Mary, but you were looking at the column E1. You're comparing the NOIs. I mean, it's the original assessment in D is $1 million NOI, $1 million less than the reconstructed NOI in E1, which accounts for vacant office space. We always account for vacant office space in the potential income. I know if our landlords seem unfair, empty is empty, no rent is no rent, but that's standard appraisal practice. So I don't change my position. I just wanted to know if I missed something that you said, because you said it was low, was out of the 10 million plus was out of line. I don't see it from column D.
Right now, I realize, I mean, I guess it's just the difference of including all of the potential that it hasn't achieved for years.
Which is why, of course, we write off below the line. But one of these days, there's going to be an implosion, and I hope not, in the office market, and there's going to be some radical changes. But I think, again, as Johnny said, going down double digits is the right direction at this time.
All right, Mr. Yates? Can you turn your microphone on, sir?
Now, I was going to say, I think the county did address the concession issue and the rate issue. I don't have that much problem with what the county has, and it does show the trend is going down, but I think the county also has indicated that and addressed that some. I didn't have a problem with it. After I looked at a couple items, it seemed to be the county went to it. They're addressing it. I'm
Right,
okay
the
with
key
them.
word there was came down some, but
Yeah.
all right, well, I believe you have the vote, so if somebody'd like to make a motion. Mr. Mendez.
I'll make a motion that we confirm the county's 2024 assessment at 116,127,000 even.
Okay, do I have a second? Mr. Metzgen, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's 4-3, and that's without myself, Mr. Hoffman, and Mr. Lawson. The county is confirmed at 116,127,000 even. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is RPC 34020234 at 2121 Crystal Drive. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to first start by directing the board's attention to our page 71 of 172. This is the Crystal Park 2, located at 2121 Crystal Drive. We've included this as part of three tax parcel, it comprises three individual tax RPCs, the main building, and then 2 vacant lots. The total assessment is $183,358,200, and what we're asking for from the board today is a value of $132,619,500. This property is an 11-story office building that was originally built in 1986, 510,902 square feet of leasable office space, and again, a short walk from the Crystal City Metro Station. If I can direct the county's attention now again to the office I&E summary sheet that's found on page 5 of 172. You'll see that the county is estimating $40 a square foot for the occupied office space and $37 a square foot for what they're estimating at 59,214 square feet of vacant office space as of the valuation date, and applying a 13% vacancy rate. In their test column, after getting our evidence package, the I&E surveys and rent rolls that were submitted as of 1/1/14, they actually adjusted that down 8%. However, the actual vacancy, if you look on page, and that's included on page 110 of our package, right behind the I&E survey, was 99,020 square feet of vacant space, which would indicate it falls within the county's guideline range of 18 to 23% vacancy, and a 23% vacancy rate should therefore apply. The petitioner's gross potential income on column G is based off of a occupied square footage of $37.38. Again, that's the net effective rent when concessions are considered, and that's right in line with the $37 a square foot as well. $37 a square foot for the vacant square footage that's being applied in our analysis as well, which is just matched up with what the county's estimate is. Concessions, if you look at what the actual concessions were being reported in the most recent prior years, it was $2.6 million in free rental concessions and abatements in 2022 and $3.7 million in 2023. Again, that the county's $40 a square foot for the occupied square feet appears to not take any consideration into the actual net effective rent, and it's just a gross rental rate that is being applied. On if you just look at the historical trend of the EGI, this property as well, similar to the last property we just discussed, has been in a downward trend. Now, there was a slight bump up from 22 to 23 with regard to the EGI and total revenue, but it reported 19.4 million in effective gross income in 2020, 18.2 in 2021, 14.8 in 2022, and then most recently 15,160,064 in 2023. The EGI, if you look in comparison to the county's test column, in column E in comparison to column F, which is the county's revision, their estimate of the effective gross income is $19.4 million, which is $5.3 million higher than was actually reported most recently in 2023. Operating expenses were, again, just looking at the trend, 3.8 million in 2020, 3.8 million in 2021, 3.9 million in 2022, and then most recently 4.1 million. The county, on a EGI basis, that's 27.2% in the calendar year 2023. The county's revision or test column in column F is at 4,160,000, and that's 21.3% of the effective gross income, or based off their effective gross income estimate of 19.5 million. So again, we're hoping that the county considers the operating expense ratio in determining a proper operating expenses in their income analysis. The NOI, if you look again, the trend here has been going down for the last 3 years. It had a slight bump up, most recently reported, but in column E, you'll see that the actual NOI reported in 2023 was $11 million. The county, in their revision estimate, is estimated an NOI of $15.3 million, which is $5.2 million higher than, again, what this property was able to achieve. And they've not been able to achieve anything near that amount dating back to 2020, which is last year. And since 2020, there's been a significant decline in total revenue that's been reported at this property. Again, one of the main things, though, is when you look at the rent roll and the vacancy, the actual vacancy would indicate the use of a 23% expense ratio. The county's column F is using now not a 13% vacancy rate, which they were originally applying, but an 8% vacancy rate, which, again, per their guidelines and what is indicated on the 1/1/2024 rent roll for the actual occupancy at the property, a 23% vacancy rate should be applicable to this property. So again, we're hoping that the county or the board considers the county's actual guidelines that they follow for vacancy in their income analysis and treat this property accordingly on a uniform basis with the other office properties in the county. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Thank you. For this property, similar to the last property, when we're looking at the history of the property, you'll see in columns A, B, and C, and column E that there's vacant square footage in 2020, 120,241, B, 145,036, C, 140,557, and then column E, 99,020 square feet. Again, I'd like to emphasize that the income, the overall NOI, is not reporting what the potential income should be for the property, given that those vacant square footage is not being reported in those years. As an assessment, we are projecting what that income would be. And when you compare the department's revision and the column G of the appellant, we're using the same figures with that projected vacant square footage income. If this property or any other property was 100% vacant, we would be doing the same methodology and applying what a projected vacant square footage income would be. When looking at this particular property, as the rent roll states on page 7, you'll see at the current, with the current tenants in the property, the income or the base rent total for the leases in place, this is not including the vacant square footage, is about 18,854,721. That's a $2.6 million difference than what the county is projecting for this property in the test column, and then slightly less than what we had in the original. If you compare columns F to column D, line 1, we're at 16.2, and then the original assessment is at 17.8. Again, the rent roll states that the base rent total for 2023 was 18 million. So just to give you the county is looking at it and how the information that we receive in the rent rolls are used to test what we have and how we compare that to the original assessment. Again, for this particular property, the rent roll suggests that the average leased office space rents for $46.46. Again, the county is using $40 in the test or the revision, and then $40 in the original assessment. So there's that delta there of $6.46 attributable to some of the concessions that Mr. Warren has spoken to. Now, again, in our projected column E1, yes, there is a increase compared to column E, but again, we're emphasizing that the not reported income of the vacant square footage is imputed there to project the overall income of the property. When we come down to the overall NOI, we're in line in the original assessment compared to what the projected income should be when you compare column E to E1. And then in our revision, we are less than what the reconstructed I&E and E1 is projecting for that vacant space. So with that, we do ask that the board confirm this case based on the information I provided. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez.
For the department, in column F, the department used an 8% stabilized vacancy as opposed to a 13% in column D. What's the difference there?
Yes, I do apologize. I did email Mr. Warren about new leases that I found to be in place based on the CoStar reports that I saw. That was emailed in May 20th. I did ask for inspection as well on June 6th. And then that's mainly the difference there, because what I saw, if you scroll to page 7 of the rent roll, I did indicate that there was some information there, some leases that were leased in 2022. There's one in March of 2023, and then primarily in 2022, November, October, November, December. And so when looking at that, I feel, and looking at the actual comparing that with what they sent in the rent roll, I made a determination that these leases were deducted in our test column. Originally, though, we didn't factor that in. I think originally we had a higher square footage vacant, and we applied the 13% in the original assessment. So that's the comparison there. The 99,020 square feet is what was reported, but due to my research, I found that there was more leases in place, and I would like to, see what those leases were, but we didn't receive that information.
But you put the numbers in.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin.
I'd like to follow on that question. I must have missed something. You not being able to verify what may be leases in place that you're not so sure about. You kept the total vacancy at the 99,000 figure for your test in column F, but then you lowered the percent total vacancy, rent loss, and concessions from 13 to 8. So you kept the apparent vacancy higher, but again, the write-off lower. Did I understand that?
Well, yeah, I wanted to keep it apples to apples. When we did the reconstruction, I wanted everything in line with the square footage. So when they reported the income for column E, that's attributable to the 405,848 square feet. And rather than changing, those figures to match what I believe the vacant square footage is, I kept it the same just to keep all the numbers in line. And so then, with myself or with the board, they would compare the actual square footage numbers and it would match up across the board to include the appellant's numbers as well and how they broke theirs down.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that. Let me ask you a different question. A second question for the department. In the last case, you ably, in my judgment, accommodated the large historical concessions that property owner had to provide to get, whatever occupancy they have, by plugging in an office space rent dollar number per square foot much less than the actual. Here, not so much. And in fact, your row 1 throughout, columns D through G is pretty consistent. Would you tell me in this case, if you accommodated the concessions also being chronically encountered in this building, or were accommodated, and if so, how?
Yes. So if you compare our original assessment to our test or our column F, you'll see that the original assessment still used the $40 a square foot. Now, there wasn't much change there due to the fact that, again, when looking at the rent roll, the average was $46.46. We were, I guess, in line with our original assessment, so that we didn't feel that there was a need to change in our test column or our revision column, column F, where, again, they're at 46.46 as the average rent, and we're at $40 a square foot. So there is some concessions there.
Rob, I read the wrong line. I looked at, you plugged in page 4 under 1A that you use $42 a square foot when in fact you use 40. So there is, you've accommodated this. Now that I see in number 4, 46.46, as you said, you've accommodated this property exactly like you did the last one. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Rob, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, thank you. We do ask the board to confirm the original assessment. Again, we're projecting for the vacant square footage. We do use the same estimation as the appellant in $37 a square foot for that vacant space. We did make the change to what we saw was the vacant square footage for this property. We see that there are leases. This property is leasing up, and we feel that in column F is a truer account of what that square footage should be. If you look at the original assessment, we're at a higher figure, and we do ask that you confirm the original assessment at $182,005,800. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yeah, so with regard to the question about the vacancy, and well, you're going to take the word of CoStar against like what was actually submitted. So Rob is correct. He did ask us a number of questions about leases that he was seeing in comparison to what he saw on CoStar and vacancy. We did provide him an extremely detailed response from the owner regarding about 4 or 5 leases that included lease abstracts. This was back on June 18th. There was lease, he mentioned Suite 300, which he saw was 20,120 square feet that was vacant in CoStar. We responded that this was actually Nook's Suite 302 that took up 13,478 square feet of occupied space. There was Suite, and so this is already included in the occupied space. So that vacancy, it's not vacant, or what he was mentioning, it's not 20,000 square foot lease, it's a 13,000 square foot lease. There was a lease for 21,635 square foot of space that he was referring to that he thinks is part of the vacancy that we're assuming. We responded, that's Tadalec Technology, Suite 500, and GeoNorth Systems, Suite 510. We attached both of those lease abstracts.
I'm missing.
What was that? The actual tenant names?
No, your time has expired. So just if you could wrap
Okay.
up, please.
So just the county did not include these responses, these email responses. We included very detailed responses on June 18th with lease abstracts. The actual submitted rent roll should be given the most weight when you're looking at what vacancy should be applied to the current assessment analysis.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Warren. All right. It's just among the board members. Where's everybody? Mr. Hoffman.
I mean, I looked at it the same as the last property, with a 3-year average on NOI. Actuals came up with 140 million, 5,200. And you know, this one actually has lower vacancy. It ends up with a higher per square foot value because of the NOI, so that makes sense. I just want to share, I mean, trying to work this thing towards a stabilized vacancy rate below 20% is still very much like a theoretical exercise versus what the actual is. I remember looking at a building once, talking to a lender about it, a bank, you know, local bank, and you know, going through my pro forma at 5% vacancy, and he goes, "Well, what's the vacancy rate in the market there?" And I'm like, "Well, it's 15 to 20%." He goes, "That should be in your pro forma. That's what the market is going to provide." So this one's at 19%. That's pretty much where the market is right now in Arlington.
Okay. Other folks? Mr. Lawson.
Yes, and I'll, you know, I agree with Greg, but you look at the actual of 11 million, and then the county says, well, we think it's gone up 4 million in the worst office market that we've ever known in Arlington. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, Mr. Matzkin.
Barnes, what do you mean by that? It went up 4 million.
On the column E, these column F. Column F is 15,900,292 versus 11 million of actual.
Okay, the NOIs. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, how is that possible?
Well, because I think it's because they didn't put in their potential income vacant office on row 1A. So look at the reconstructed E1 and compare the NOIs.
But that's speculative. You're not. I mean, are we going to look at actual figures, or are we just going to always guess? I think this whole idea that on the income expense statement, you're supposed to guess what it would be if you actually rented everything. I think that maybe the owner could provide that information separately or something, but this is what the property actually yielded. And
Well,
to me, that's more important than all this guesswork.
Okay, but if we just say vacant is vacant and it creates no income, and I'm not going to speculate, you know, then we can't deduct below it the vacancy, rent loss, and concessions.
No, I think we do that for the
13%
appraisal.
or 8% should not be there. It's a wash.
Yeah.
For the appraisal, yeah, we should do that, but not for the actual. And when you do that, if making these assumptions and adding to the income and adding to the expenses and trying to determine what concessions would be, if you end up at 15 million versus an actual of 11 million, something's not right.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
Mr.
Barnes, to your point, it's just as likely that vacant space gets rented as all that GSA space, which is probably producing almost $5 million a year, goes dark. If you want to speculate you could pick one direction or the other, right? You could say that they lose $5 million in NOI next year because the GSA doesn't renew in 24.
Yeah.
And the
Right,
vacant
Mr. Yates?
space, the vacant space has value. It may not have income right now. I think the idea of what the county did and what the appellants argued concerning vacant space or what has been leased, I find that more of a valuable area of what is vacant. I mean, that's where I see the adjustment.
Well,
But
well,
you
Mark,
know,
why?
just to say that space has no value going forward, like they're never going to lease it or never want to try, that's not valid.
No, we're not saying that, Mark, but I mean, the assumption could also be, like Greg said, the assumption could be the vacancy increases next year.
It could.
Yeah,
And I don't.
in a declining market, it's probably safer to say you're going to have higher vacancy in the next year than you are in the current year, or lower NOI in the next year than you are in the current year. So the old way of doing things, where we just took the NOI and figured it was going to go up next year, and if it's 10% vacant, maybe it'll be 3% vacant next year. It's not the case right now. We're the housing market in Detroit, Michigan in 2009, right? People are moving out; they're not moving in. So there were houses that you could buy for a penny from the city of Detroit. This is the situation with vacant office right now. I don't know if you guys have grasped that yet, but the actual empty space in Arlington County office is worth practically zero.
The other thing too, Mark, is if you go into a lender and you have a lease that's going to expire in a year, the lender will consider that vacant.
Been there. I agree.
Yeah, that's true.
But there is some value to that space. It is not zero.
No, we don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, Mr. Matskin?
Adding on to that directly, we see this all the time, and we see it here. The department's very consistent. In this case, a reconstructed vacancy because the appellant didn't supply it at a close to 20% discount of the value, not 100% discount, not 50, 20, maybe 20 is not enough, but it's significant. And then the department just brought it then the appellant's pro forma, based on let me start over. Based on probably what was the situation on 1/1/24, that's about the value, the potential value of the vacant space based on updated information from 2023. That shows up in the test, the exact same number, potential income, both in the test column F and in the appellant's pro forma column G. We're not just making wild assumptions about they're going to triple their vacancy or have the vacancy. They took the 1/1/24 number and applied it equally. So I just don't see the potential for wild speculation. It's based on a real number as achieved in 2023.
Well, I don't think it's wild, because I mean, it is what it is, but I mean, it's hard when you're using an 8% vacancy factor when we know it's much higher.
Right.
And I agree.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not that the property doesn't, the vacant portion of the building doesn't have value, but it's difficult where year after year, and we don't seem to be in an environment where this is going to fix itself this year or next.
My bottom line is that it didn't go down enough percentage wise. I mean, it's only 2% or something, but I couldn't figure out a number as opposed to the last appellant where it was 20% or so, 18%. If somebody could come up with some dependable number that would lower the NOI and therefore the valuation, dependable meaning defensible, then I would certainly support it.
What about increasing the vacancy along the lines that the appellant has said the county looked at a third party's information? The county looked at, the third parties saying this was leased for X or in X square footage. The appellants argued that it was not and said that they provided those abstracts on those leases. That it had less space leased than what was being reported publicly. That the vacancy is where the problem is. I don't have that number.
Well, of course, given there were some leases that apparently are in place but can't be confirmed, I'm not, certainly the vacancy is more than 8%, but I don't know that we can get to a more dependable number, given that we have some space up in the air that is either tenanted or not, you know. But of course, the higher percentage vacancy in column D, I mean, is already there at 13%. I certainly would support that way over 8%, but it's in the column that comes out with the lowest valuation between the two, the test and the original. So again, I'm searching, maybe some other number ought to be adjusted in either column.
The 13 into the test.
Well, maybe the test, I'm just going to say that, maybe the dollar figure 2,617,000 plus in column D ought to be transferred over into column F, 13%. You should be able to do a quick math on that. Does anybody think that would help out and adjust the test to make it more? Because I like tests a lot because they're based on more current information, of course.
Right.
Right, let me do that. Okay, here more. So, because it's a big difference, of course. It's $1
Roughly $1 million.
Let me do it again.
Am I reading this right? That the GSA's 22% of rentable area in this building are vacating in late this year, and we're counting that as not vacant space? That's insane. I mean, we could start with that. We can add 112,950 to the vacancy if that's what you're looking for, but they're gone. And then next year, along with anybody else that has a renewal that does work with those agencies.
But Ken, I got a number. I don't know if you're doing it, but I just increased the vacancy on column F to 13%. I get a NOI of 14,168,170, and it caps out at 177,323, 788.
Yes. Yes. All right, my mic's on. Yeah.
Okay.
And
What do people feel
I
about
would
that?
add, we just to address Greg's reasonable position, we've never ever counted what might happen during the calendar year as affecting what is the actual situation in the beginning of the calendar year. I mean, otherwise we'll just get all kinds of letters from all kinds of tenants saying, oh, everybody's moving out all the time and all office buildings. I'm being extreme here.
Yeah. I mean,
you know,
the thing that just sticks in my head is this is a really good analogy for the Boston office building that's just sold last year for $104 a square foot. They had a bunch of go dark GSA space that they were still technically paying rent on, but didn't have much term left. And it was like same occupancy level. So same rents, concrete building, good parking garage underneath it. I'm like, that sold for $104 a square foot. So I'm just trying to be reasonable and fair. Yeah, I mean, that's all.
yeah.
All right, well, how do people feel about Ken's number of 177,328.8?
I like it.
I could live with it.
I'd do that.
I'll be okay with that.
Okay, all right, Mr. Metzger?
I move that we reduce the, I'm sorry, I just took it off my calculator. reduce the assessment to 177 million. Mary, please end it.
177, 323, 800.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's based on the county's test increasing the expenses, or I'm sorry, the vacancy to 13%. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Yates, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so, all right, it's 5-2, and that is without Mr. Lawson and Mr. Hoffman. So it is
I
reduced.
just, yeah, Mary, I
Okay, hold
thought
on,
it.
hold on, hold
Okay,
on. I understand. You want it lower. 177, 323, 800 is what it's reduced to. And I understand what you're saying, and I too
Right.
agree with you. However, if I voted with you, it would stand
I
at
know.
182 million. So we did the best that we could on that.
Right.
Okay. Moving along to the next RPC is RPC 34020-261 at 1503A Crystal Drive. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes
So
on this.
that parcel is one of the ones that we just talked about that was wrapped up in the first parcel ending 233 for 2011. And then the other 3 parcels, or excuse me, 2 parcels are with the one we just discussed. So that
Right,
should
but
be,
but because they're not in an economic unit, we need to
okay,
do
we're not,
something in each of them.
and I would just say we're not contesting any of the county's values on those. We wrap them into the economic units for the ones we just discussed. So we're not
the
contesting
county would
the
agree.
current value.
Okay, so just.
Yep.
All right, so just for the, to be conforming then to this, so. All right, so everybody's in agreement on 34020-261 at a value of 325,400. Is that correct, Mr. Warren?
Excuse me. Well, hold on one second. This is 261.
261. I mean, they're open items on the agenda. We need to
Yeah,
address.
if that's the current assessment value, then we're in agreement with that.
Okay. And just to confirm, Mr. Peralta, that is the number, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So then I'm going to move to confirm the county at 325,400 on this first parcel. Do I have a second? Okay. Mr. Mendez, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ken, you have frozen.
Am I still frozen? I'm finding
No,
you all are
Did-
freezing from time to time.
Okay, so are you in agreement on that?
I'm in
confirming the
agreement.
county? Okay, so that's
Yes.
unanimous. County's confirmed on that portion at 325,400. The next one at ending RPC, I'm sorry, 34020-262. That value is 3024. Is that correct, Mr. Peralta?
Yes.
Okay. I'll move to confirm the county on that. Do I have a second? Mr.
Second.
Yates, all in favor?
Hmm.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. And the final one is RPC 34020-241. That final value is
$1,027,000.
1,027,000 even. Is that correct, Mr. Peralta?
Correct.
Okay, a motion, do I have a second? Mr. Yates again, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Hmm.
And Mr. Hoffman, you're for that? Okay, all right, so that's confirmed as well at 1,027,000. Okay, that completes the agenda. Thank you, everybody. Does anybody have any other board business? Mr. Lawson?
Yes, ma'am. I don't know if I should share this now, or maybe you and I should share it
Okay, well, if
independently.
you're in doubt, I would do it after then, because this is
Okay.
being recorded.
Okay,
All right, and just FYI for folks, we are not having meetings next week. But we will reconvene. So we're gonna adjourn now at 10:11. Reconvene tomorrow morning, July 17th, 9 a.m. in person for the board members.
Mhm.
And then just a further follow-up, just on vacations, we're just trying to track. The week of Labor Day, the Tuesday and Wednesday of that, the 3rd and 4th, we already have 2 of the 7 members out that week. So if anybody else is planning, because we need a quorum of 4, I need to know quick if something's gonna happen, because then we would need to let the county know if we don't have a quorum to not schedule that week. Or I guess, Derek, if you're gonna not fill up slots of a week, that would be the week not to fill it.
I'm gonna miss the 3rd.
You're gonna miss the 3rd?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a tight if something else comes up for anybody. So just Derek, kind of keep that in mind as you're scheduling.
Will
Moving
do.
forward, and then if other
Yeah.
folks can just, I have Mark's vacation in October. Anybody else that's got, preset dates that you know about, if you could just let me know, just to kind of juggle this.
I'll be here that week.
Okay. No, but if you're gone any other weeks, if you guys would let me know.
Okay.
Okay. That will do it. We will see everybody tomorrow morning then.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sounds
Go
good.
on.
Did that make sense?